What if the silence of deep space wasn't empty, but waiting for a god? What if somewhere beyond the Federation's maps, beyond Klingon borders and Romulan shadows, an ancient Egyptian deity chose a new battlefield among the stars? And what would happen if Starfleet's logic, diplomacy, and science collided with something far older than warp drive? The Fist of Khonshu. The stars had always belonged to explorers. But that night, as the USS Enterprise drifted along the edge of a dark nebula, the stars belonged to something else. A distortion tore through subspace without warning. Not a wormhole, not a quantum filament. Something stranger, something alive. On the bridge, Captain Jean-Luc Picard felt it before the sensors died, a subtle pressure in the air, like the universe inhaling. "Report," he said, calm but alert. Data's golden eyes flickered. "Anomalous energy signature detected. Captain, it does not correspond to any known Federation Romulan or Klingon technology. It appears ritualistic." Ritualistic. The word felt wrong in a place of tricorders and warp cores. The anomaly pulsed once, then something fell through it. Not a ship. A man. He plummeted through vacuum as though gravity still owned him. Wrapped in white, cloaked in crescent symbols, unconscious, or dead. And yet, as he drifted toward the Enterprise's deflector field, his eyes snapped open. They were not the eyes of a Starfleet officer. They were the eyes of a servant of a god. Marc Spector gasped as oxygen flooded his lungs in sickbay, coughing as if he had swallowed the Nile itself. Above him, sterile lights glowed instead of moonlight. Machines hummed where chanting priests once echoed. Dr. Crusher leaned over him. "Easy, you're safe." Safe. The word triggered something deep inside him. "You are never safe, Marc." That voice slithered through his skull like wind through a tomb. Khonshu. Mark's vision blurred, and for a heartbeat, the ceiling of sickbay became a cathedral of black stone. Towering above him stood the skeletal figure of the moon god, wrapped in tattered robes, skull-beak gleaming. "I did not send you here to rest," Khonshu whispered. "This realm festers with injustice." Marc clenched his jaw. "I was in New York." "No," Khonshu corrected. "You were chosen." Back on the bridge, the senior staff reviewed footage of the anomaly. A humanoid male surviving hard vacuum without a suit. An energy signature embedded in his cells that defied Federation science. Worf crossed his arms. "He's a warrior." Data tilted his head. "His physiology is human. However, his cellular regeneration suggests external enhancement. Possibly divine in origin." Picard frowned slightly. "We are scientists, Mr. Data." "Indeed, Captain." However, the energy readings matched no known scientific framework. In sickbay, Marc sat up abruptly as security officers entered. "Sir," one began, "we need to ask you." Marc's hand shot out, grabbing the officer's wrist with impossible speed. Instinct, violence, training, or something else. For a split second, his reflection in a medical monitor shifted. Not one face but three. "Marc, Stephen, Jake. Easy," he muttered to himself. "We're not in Cairo anymore." Crusher raised a calming hand. "No one is threatening you." Marc slowly released the officer. "I need to know where I am," he said. "You're aboard the USS Enterprise," Crusher replied. "Flagship of the United Federation of Planets." Marc blinked. "That's not real." "Oh," Khonshu crooned from the corner of the room, unseen by everyone else. "It is very real and very broken." Hours later, in the observation lounge, Marc sat across from Picard. Stars streaked past the viewport in silent majesty. Picard studied him. He claimed to serve an Egyptian god. "I don't live," Marc replied flatly. "I do." "And this Khonshu, he brought you here." Marc hesitated. "Did he?" The last thing he remembered was chasing a cultist through Manhattan rooftops under a full moon. Then the sky cracked open. A pull. A fall. "I think he did," Marc admitted. Picard folded his hands. "Mr. Spector, the Federation is founded on reason. We have encountered beings of immense power before entities once mistaken for gods." "The Q?" Marc asked suddenly. Picard's eyes narrowed slightly. "You are familiar with Q?" Marc shook his head slowly. "No. But Khonshu is—" In sickbay, instruments suddenly spiked. Across the ship, lights flickered, and in the cold vacuum beyond the Enterprise, something moved within the nebula. Not a ship, not an anomaly, a fleet. Romulan warbirds decloaked one by one, drawn by the same energy signature that had torn open space. On the Romulan flagship, Commander Tavar studied the readings. The energy matches ancient iconography recovered from Vulcan's pre-Serac era. she murmured. A god entity. Her eyes hardened. Capture it. Back on the Enterprise. Red alert blared. Mark stood abruptly as klaxons echoed. Picard tapped his combat bridge to all stations battle readiness. Mark felt it then, a pull stronger than gravity. Khonshu's voice thundered inside him. They come not for you, but for me. The viewport darkened as a massive Romulan warbird loomed into view, green plasma weapons charging. Mark's heart pounded. I didn't ask for this, he muttered. No, Khonshu replied, but you are my fist, and the stars are full of sinners. Outside, the first plasma torpedo fired. Inside, Marc Spector smiled grimly as bandages began to wrap around his fists. Because if this universe thought it understood gods, it was about to meet one in white. What if the first punch thrown in a war between empires wasn't by a starship, but by a man possessed by a god? And what if that single strike shattered not only shields, but the fragile balance of the Alpha Quadrant? The Romulan plasma torpedo streaked toward the Enterprise like a green star collapsing in reverse. Evasive maneuvers, Picard commanded. The ship lurched as the torpedo grazed the shields, space rippling in emerald fire. Consoles sparked. Crew members braced against impact. But in the chaos, one figure didn't reach for a console. He stepped forward. Marc Spector felt the tremor of the ship beneath his boots, the hum of warp coils, the metallic scent of recycled air. None of it belonged to him. None of it felt like Earth. Yet the moonlight impossible, artificial, bleeding through the observation lounge, windows wrapped around him like home. He would fight a fleet, Picard demanded, incredulous, as bandages slithered up Mark's arms. I wouldn't, Mark replied quietly. The white hood formed over his head, but you'd, on the Romulan flagship. Commander Tavar watched the Enterprise's shield strength fluctuate. Prepati tractor being disable engines. Before the order could be completed, every sensor on her ship spiked. A surge of unknown energy erupted from the Federation vessel, not outward, but upward, as if the Enterprise itself had exhaled something divine. In the void between ships, space bent. Mark didn't step into vacuum. Vacuum stepped aside for him. He appeared between the Enterprise and the Warbird, in a flash of silver light, suspended in nothingness. No suit, no tether, only the flowing white cloak of moon night and eyes glowing like twin crescents. Romulan gunners hesitated. Fire, Tavar ordered. Disruptor beams lanced forward. Mark raised a hand. For a heartbeat, he expected pain. Instead, the beams curved. They bent around him like light around a black hole, dispersing into harmless arcs. On the Enterprise bridge, Data's voice sharpened. Cupped in the humanoid is altering the trajectory of directed energy weapons through gravitational distortion. Picard stared at the view screen, breath shallow. Impossible. Apparently not. Sir, in the void, Mark felt something deeper than adrenaline. He felt Khonshu fully, not a whisper, not a shadow. A presence vast and cold, stretching beyond constellations. You are my avatar. Khonshu's voice boomed within him. Show them what gods do. Mark clenched his fists and charged. He crossed the vacuum in seconds, slamming into the Romulan warbird's hull with enough force to buckle Duranian plating. The impact rippled across the ship's surface like a meteor strike. Inside, Romulan officers were thrown from their stations. What is he? One gasped. Mark tore through the outer hull as though it were parchment, entering corridors bathed in green light. Emergency bulkheads sealed behind him, but bandage-wrapped fists crushed them aside. Phaser fire met him. He felt at this time heat, impact, but it barely slowed him. Crescent darts flew from his hands, embedding into walls and consoles, short-circuiting entire sections. Yet even as he fought, something inside him questioned. This isn't justice. These are soldiers. Khonshu's voice cut through his doubt. They hunt me. They would chain me. They would dissect the divine. Mark hesitated in a corridor filled with stunned Romulan guards, and in that hesitation, another voice emerged, smoother, softer. Mark, maybe we talk first. Yeah. Stephen Grant's accent slipped into his mind. A bit extreme to invade an alien ship, don't you think? Jake Lockley growled beneath it. Too late for talking. The internal fracture cost him. A disruptor blast struck his chest at point-blank range, hurling him into a bulkhead. Armor cracked. Breath left his lungs. Commander Tuvar stepped forward, weapon raised. You are not a god. You are an anomaly. Mark coughed, pushing himself up. You have no idea, he whispered. Behind Tovar the shadows of the corridor lengthened unnaturally. They twisted, coalesced. and from them emerged the towering skeletal form of Khonshu, visible now, not just to Mark Romulan. Officers froze. Tuvar's logical composure faltered. A psionic projection, she muttered. Khonshu's hollow eyes burned. I am no projection. Every light aboard the warbird shattered at once. Darkness consumed the ship, and in that darkness, only crescent eyes glowed. On the Enterprise, alarms cascaded through engineering. The Romulan vessel's power grid has collapsed, data reported. Complete systems failure. Picard leaned forward. What of Mr. Spector? On the view screen, the warbird drifted lifelessly. Then a flash of silver erupted from its hull. Mark reappeared in open space, breathing hard, cloak torn but eyes still blazing. The Romulan warbird hung crippled behind him, weapons offline. He floated there, staring at the Enterprise, at the people inside who now looked at him not as a patient, but as a weapon. He felt it a shift. Picard's voice came through open com frequencies. Mr. Spector, return to the ship. Return. Mark looked back at the disabled warbird. He hadn't killed them. He could have. Khonshu had wanted him to. He showed mercy. The god hissed. They weren't criminals, Mark replied internally. They sought to cage me in Starfleet, Mark shot back. What do they want? Khonshu did not answer immediately. That silence was worse than anger. Mark drifted back toward the Enterprise, uncertainty gnawing at him. Because for the first time since becoming Moon Knight, he wasn't fighting street gangs or cultists. He was standing in the middle of an interstellar political powder keg. The Romulans would not forget this humiliation. The Federation would not ignore this power. And somewhere, in dimensions beyond warp and wormholes, other entities had felt Khonshu's arrival. One in particular smiled. In a flash of white light, a well-dressed figure appeared on the Romulan bridge, stepping over unconscious officers, as if strolling through a garden. He examined the shattered consoles with amused interest. Oh my, Q said lightly. Now this is new. He looked up into the darkness where Khonshu's presence lingered. A god of the moon playing among starships. How deliciously primitive. His grin widened. Let's see how long your little avatar survives when the universe starts playing back. And with a snap of his fingers the stars flickered. What if the real threat wasn't the Romulans, but a being who found gods amusing? And what if Moon Knight had just stepped onto a cosmic chessboard where the pieces were civilization Xancu was already moving them? The stars outside the Enterprise flickered, not dimmed, not distorted, flickered like a faulty holodeck projection struggling to maintain illusion. On the bridge, officers exchanged uneasy glances. Report, Picard demanded. Data's fingers moved rapidly across his console. Captains, stellar objects within sensor range are momentarily phasing out of measurable existence before reappearing. It is as though reality itself is blinking. Picard closed his eyes briefly. Q. As if summoned by the accusation, a slow clap echoed through the bridge. Bravo, Jean-Luc, came the familiar, silk-cleaced voice. In a flash of white light, Q materialized beside the captain's chair, impeccably dressed, smiling as if attending a gala rather than a crisis. You always do recognize me in the most dramatic moments. Worf's hand hovered near his phaser. Leave this ship. Q waved him off. Oh, please, Lieutenant. If I wanted this ship gone, you'd all be discussing it as a philosophical metaphor in some higher plane. His eyes drifted to the view screen where Marc Spector had just re-entered the Enterprise through the shuttle bay. Now that, Q murmured, is interesting. In the corridor outside the shuttle bay, Mark collapsed to one knee the moment gravity reclaimed him. The strain of channeling Khonshu across vacuum had left cracks in his armor and deeper fractures in his mind. Stephen's voice whispered anxiously, "That bloke on the Romulan ship. That wasn't normal, was it?" Jake growled. "Something else is here." Khonshu's presence loomed, silent but coiled. Mark stood slowly as security officers surrounded him, getting more cautious now, less certain. Then the lights in the corridor shifted. Time froze. Security officers halted mid-stop. Air stopped moving. Even the low hum of the engines ceased. Only Mark remained mobile, and behind him, applause echoed. "Extraordinary," Q said, strolling casually past frozen Starfleet officers. "You can move." Mark turned slowly. He didn't know this man, but he recognized power when he felt it. "You're not human," Mark said. Q placed a hand on his chest in mock offense. "That hurts. I'm deeply human today. Chose the form myself." Mark's eyes narrowed. "You're like him." Q's smile sharpened. "Oh no, I'm not like your skeletal bird god friend. I'm far more evolved. At the mention of Khonshu, shadows in the corridor deepened, the temperature dropped, and for the first time in centuries, Q felt something unexpected. Resistance. Khonshu manifested partially behind, Marc towering, silent, vast. Q tilted his head, intrigued. Well now, he mused, an actual deity, not a mistaken energy being, not an ascended humanoid. Something older. Khonshu's voice rolled like distant thunder. You toy with mortals. Q shrugged. It's educational. You disrupt balance. I'll refine it. Marc looked between them, heart pounding. I'm not your pawn. Q laughed softly. Oh, Marc, you've always been someone's pawn. The words hit deeper than any disruptor blast. Because they were true, Khonshu had chosen him, manipulated him, resurrected him. Was this any different? Q stepped closer. Tell me, Fist of Khonshu, do you think you're here by accident? Or did your master step into a universe already occupied by beings who consider gods a phase of development? Khonshu's presence flared. I existed before your continuum crawled from nothing. Q's expression shifted just slightly. Ah, he whispered. Now that is a claim. With a snap of his fingers, the corridor dissolved. Marc found himself standing not on the Enterprise, but on the surface of Earth's moon. No suit, no ship, just grey dust and endless black sky. Earth hung above them. You like the moon? Q said casually, hands behind his back. Thought we'd chat somewhere sentimental. Marc felt the pull, immediately stronger here. Khonshu towered at full scale now, skeletal wings stretching across the lunar horizon. You dare? The god hissed. Q floated upward, unfazed. Oh, I dare, constantly. He gestured toward Earth, down there billions of lives. Starfleet, protecting them with diplomacy and science. Up here, ancient vengeance and blood oaths. Marc's fists clenched. What do you want? He demanded. Q's eyes gleamed. I want to see what happens when your kind of justice collides with theirs. The Federation believes in law, due process, redemption. He looked directly at Marc. You believe in punishment. Images flooded Marc's mind. Criminals broken under crescent blades, cultists dragged screaming into the night. You call yourself a hero, Q continued softly. But what happens when your god demands the execution of someone Starfleet has promised to protect? Marc's breath hitched. He caused deep down. He knew that moment would come. Khonshu spoke coldly. This being seeks to fracture your loyalty. Q smiled. I don't need to fracture anything. It's already cracked. The lunar surface trembled. Reality rippled. And suddenly, Marc saw it a vision. The Enterprise orbiting a distant planet, a colony under Federation protection. And at its center, a child, marked with the same energy signature as Khonshu. Q's voice echoed. In 3 days, that child will grow into something capable of destroying entire systems. Marc stared. And your god will demand you end it before it begins. Khonshu said nothing. Silence confirmed everything. Marc's voice trembled. That's not justice. It is prevention, Khonshu replied. Q spread his arms. So here we are. Starfleet's mercy, a god's vengeance. And you, Marc Spector, caught between them. The moon beneath them cracked. Reality snapped back. Marc found himself collapsing onto the Enterprise bridge as time resumed. Officers staggered, unaware anything had changed. Picard stood abruptly. Mr. Spector. Marc looked up, eyes no longer glowing with certainty. They're going to make me choose, he whispered. On the view screen, a new distress signal appeared from a Federation colony world near the neutral zone. Dattel read the transmission carefully. Unusual energy readings matching Mr. Spector's biological signature. Picard's jaw tightened. Set course. Marc closed his eyes. 3 days. A child, and a god who never tolerated disobedience. Far above, unseen by the crew, Q lingered in the shadows of the bridge ceiling, smiling faintly. Oh yes, he murmured. Let's see which side your fist truly serves. What if the child Khonshu marked for death wasn't a monster, but a mirror? And what if the real question wasn't whether Moon Knight could kill, but whether he could defy a god in a universe that believed no one was above the law? The USS Enterprise dropped out of warp above the colony world of Vega IX. From orbit, it looked peaceful. Oceans shimmered beneath twin suns. Cities glittered along the coastlines like constellations fallen to the surface. But beneath the beauty, sensors told another story. Energy fluctuations consistent with Mr. Spector's anomaly, data reported. Localized to a civilian population center. Picard stood behind his chair, hands clasped. Life signs. Stable. No signs of violence. Yet Marc stood at the rear of the bridge, silent, hood down but bandages still faintly wrapped around his wrists like restless serpents. He could feel it, not just the child, the pull Khonshu's anticipation. He is here, the god whispered in his mind. Untouched, unaware, but destined. Marc swallowed. Destined for what? For judgment. On the planet's surface, Vega Ike's colony was everything the Federation promised. Unity, cooperation, children playing beneath alien trees, while Andorians and humans worked side by side. Marc walked among them wearing civilian attire provided by Starfleet, new armor, new crescent darts. Just a man trying to blend into a future he didn't understand. Stephen's voice murmured nervously inside. We're not seriously going to hurt a kid, right? That's not our thing. Jake was colder. If the god says the kid's a threat, Marc cut them off internally. No one touches a child. But even as he thought it, doubt lingered. Because Khonshu had never been wrong about corruption. At the edge of a playground, a boy sat alone on a stone bench. 7 years old, dark hair, quiet eyes that seemed older than they should be. As Marc approached, the air shifted. The boy looked up slowly. You hear him too? The child said softly. Marc stopped. What? The tall bird man, the boy replied calmly. He's loud. Marc's heart skipped. Behind him, the colony continued as normal, unaware of the invisible presence looming above. Khonshu's voice vibrated with dark satisfaction. He sees me. The boy tilted his head. He says you're broken. Marc's breath caught. What's your name? He asked carefully. Eli. Simple. Innocent. Yet energy pulsed faintly around the child's subtle distortions only Marc could feel. You're not from here, Eli continued. Neither am I. A chill ran down Marc's spine. What do you mean? Eli pointed upward. I remember following him like you. The anomaly. The tear in space. Marc realized with horror. He wasn't the only one pulled through. On the Enterprise, Data's sensors suddenly spiked. Captain, he said sharply. The child's energy signature is increasing exponentially. Picard's voice came through Marc's compage report. Marc didn't answer. He was staring at Eli as the boy's eyes flickered, not glowing, but reflecting stars that weren't Vega X's. I don't want to hurt anyone, Eli whispered, almost pleading. Khonshu's presence grew immense, filling the sky only Marc and Eli could see. He will not remain a child, the god thundered. He will reshape systems without understanding consequence. Eli covered his ears. Make him stop. Marc knelt before him. Listen to me, Marc said urgently. You're not evil. You're just different. Stephen chimed in. Maybe we help him control it. That's what heroes do. Yeah. Jake remained silent this time. Above, clouds spiraled unnaturally as space-time rippled. On the bridge, Worf turned toward Picard. If the being becomes hostile, we may not have time to respond. Picard's voice hardened. We do not execute children based on prophecy. Down on Vega Ike's Khonshu's, patience fractured. Kill him now, the god commanded. Marc stood slowly. Eli looked up at him, fear in his eyes, but also trust. You're not going to hurt me, the boy said quietly. Marc's fists trembled. He had ended criminals without hesitation. Broken bones, spilled blood. But this was something else. Khonshu manifested fully now, visible across the colony as a towering skeletal god blotting out the sun. Civilians screamed. Starfleet officers drew phasers in confusion. What is that? One officer shouted. Picard watched from orbit as planetary sensors went wild. Mr. Spector, he ordered sharply. Stand down. Khonshu's voice boomed across the colony, audible now to all. This child is a cosmic aberration. He will bring extinction. Eli's body began to glow faintly. I can't control it, he cried. Marc stepped between the god and the boy. Now Khonshu's hollow eyes burned. You defy me? For the first time, Marc said through clenched teeth. I'm choosing. The god's rage shook the ground. You exist because I willed it, and I'm done being your weapon. For a heartbeat. Silence. Then Khonshu did something he had never done before. He withdrew, not in defeat. In calculation, the sky cleared. The god vanished. Eli collapsed into Marc's arms, energy stabilizing. On the Enterprise bridge, systems normalized. Picard exhaled slowly. On the surface, colonists stared at Marc not as savior, not as villain, but as something uncertain. Marc looked down at the unconscious child. He had disobeyed a god, and gods did not forgive. High above, in a dimension beyond mortal perception, Khonshu watched. "You believe you have free will," he murmured coldly. In another flash of white light, Q appeared beside him, hands clasped behind his back. "Well," Q said with amusement, "that was unexpected." Khonshu did not look at him. "The boy will evolve regardless." Q smiled faintly. "Yes, but now the Avatar doubts you. And doubt is far more entertaining than obedience." Khonshu's gaze turned toward Earth in the distance. "If the fist refuses to strike," the god whispered, "then I shall bring judgment myself." Back on Vega X, as medical teams rushed toward Eli, the ground beneath the colony trembled again, but this time it wasn't the child. It was something far larger entering the system. On the Enterprise, Data's voice rose urgently. "Captain, multiple spatial rifts forming at the edge of the sector." Picard stared at the screen. Shapes emerged, massive, ancient, silent. Not Romulan, not Federation, not Q. Mark looked up at the sky, dread pooling in his chest, because whatever was coming, it wasn't here for diplomacy. What if Khonshu wasn't the only ancient power that felt the child awaken? And what if something older than gods, older even than the Ku, had just entered the Alpha Quadrant to pass judgment on them all? The rifts did not tear space violently. They unfolded, like petals of a cosmic flower opening in absolute silence. From each shimmering aperture emerged a shape so vast that starships looked like drifting dust beside them, metallic, geometric, impossible to measure with conventional scans. On the bridge of the Enterprise, every console flared with cascading data errors. "Unknown vessels entering the system," Data reported, voice strained despite his android composure. "Mass readings exceed planetary scale. Power signatures are beyond comparison." Worf stepped forward. "Weapons not detectable," Data replied. "They are not charging. They are simply present." Picard stared at the view screen as one of the colossal constructs rotated slowly, its surface shifting like living metal. No visible engines, no visible crew, only purpose. On Vega 9, colonists gathered in stunned silence as the sky darkened beneath the shadow of something that should not exist. Mark still knelt beside Eli, who was regaining consciousness. "They're here," Eli whispered. "Who?" Mark asked. Eli swallowed. Khonshu's voice returned, no longer raging, but wary. "They were myths even to my kind." High above the planet, one of the massive entities emitted a low-frequency vibration, not sound communication, woven into space-time itself. On the Enterprise, the universal translator struggled, then stabilized. The message was simple. "This is Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the United Federation of Planets. State your intentions." The response came without delay. "Correction will be enacted." On Vega X, Mark felt Khonshu expand behind him again, not as an aggressor, but as something bracing for confrontation. "You know them," Mark said internally. "They're here for him." "And for me," Khonshu admitted. On the bridge, Data's voice sharpened. "Captain, the constructs are generating containment fields around the planet." Blue lattice of energy descended from orbit, encasing Vega X in a shimmering cage. Transporters failed. Warp fields destabilized. The Enterprise was locked out. Worf turned to Picard. "We must act." Below, Mark rose slowly, instinctively shielding the boy. The metallic entity spoke directly into his mind. "Avatar of external deity. Step aside." Mark's fists clenched as bandages began creeping back over his arms. "You're not taking him. He's a catalyst. His maturation will destabilize stellar architecture within this quadrant." Eli trembled behind him. "I don't want to hurt anyone." Khonshu materialized fully, skeletal wings spreading across the colony once more. "You presume authority over divine evolution," the moon god thundered. The architect's avatar did not flinch. Q appeared casually atop a nearby building, observing like a spectator at a theatrical performance. "Oh, this just keeps improving," he muttered. Mark felt pressure building inside Eli, energy swelling beyond what a child's body could contain. "Stop arguing about him like he's a bomb," Mark shouted. "He's a person." The architect turned its faceless gaze toward Mark. "You defied your deity to preserve this organism. Why?" Mark hesitated only a moment. "He will consume systems." "Then we teach him not to," Mark snapped back. The architect extended a hand of shifting metal. "Instruction insufficient. Probability of catastrophic expansion 87%. Mark stepped forward. Mark looked down at Eli, then back at the towering entity. "Bind him to me. I'll be the counterweight." Khonshu recoiled. "You would chain divine potential to your fractured psyche." Mark's voice hardened. You resurrected me to punish the guilty. Now I'm choosing to protect the innocent." Stephen whispered nervously, "This could break us, mate." Jake murmured darker thoughts about control and sacrifice. Marc ignored them. The architect studied him. Integration with external deity required. Khonshu's eyes burned. "I will not submit to regulation." The architect responded simply. Above, one of the massive constructs shifted position. Energy gathered not as a weapon, but as inevitability. For the first time since arriving in this universe, Khonshu hesitated. Q leaned back, fascinated. "Oh, I do love when ancient beings are forced into paperwork." Marc turned inward, addressing the god directly. "You said I was your fist," he said quietly. The architect's hand descended toward Eli. Marc grabbed the boy's shoulder. Light exploded outward, silver and blue intertwining, as Khonshu's lunar energy merged with the architect's stabilizing field. Eli screamed, but not in pain, in transformation. On the Enterprise, sensors spiked beyond measurable limits. "Cliff in," Data said urgently. "Mr. Spector's life signs are merging with the child's energy signature." Eli stood quietly now, eyes normal once more. Marc staggered back, clutching his chest. He could feel it, a second heartbeat inside him, a second consciousness tethered through Khonshu's power. The architect's avatar stepped back, balance restored. Wandering continues. The planetary containment field dissolved. The colossal constructs began withdrawing into their rifts. Before vanishing completely, the architect delivered one final message. "If instability resumes, this quadrant will be cleansed." Q clapped slowly. "Well done, Moon Knight. You've just made yourself the babysitter of a cosmic anomaly." Marc glared at him. "Get off this planet." Q smirked. "Oh, I wouldn't miss what comes next." Because as Marc tried to steady himself, he felt something unexpected. Not just Eli's power, not just Khonshu's presence, but resistance. The god was no longer fully in control. The binding had changed the hierarchy. Marc wasn't just an avatar anymore. Marc looked up at the stars, breathing hard. "Good." High above, as the Enterprise prepared to beam them aboard, a faint crack appeared in one of the departing rifts. Something else had watched the architects intervene. Something that fed on imbalance. And it was smiling. What if the binding that saved the quadrant wasn't a solution, but an invitation? And what if something had been waiting for a god, a child, and a fractured mind to merge so it could finally break through? "Captain, a residual subspace fracture remains. Energy signature does not match the architect's." Picard's voice was tight. "Then what does it match?" Data paused. "It matches nothing." On Vega IX, Marc felt it before anyone else did. A pressure not from above, not from within, but between thoughts, between heartbeats. Eli clutched his hand. Something followed them. The boy whispered, "No continuum." Q reappeared beside Marc, unusually serious. "Oh dear," he said softly. "That's not good." Marc shot him a glare. "For once, don't be cryptic." Q's eyes tracked the widening fracture in the sky. When regulators intervene, they stir things up. And sometimes, what slips through isn't part of anyone's grand design. The crack tore open fully. Darkness spilled out, but not the absence of light. Stars above Vega IX warped, bending inward as if reality itself were being inhaled. From the rupture emerged something formless, not massive like the architects, not towering like Khonshu. It was negative space, given hunger. On the Enterprise, every system screamed. "Gravitational constants, destabilizing," Worf barked. "Shields up," Picard ordered. Data's voice sharpened. "Captain, it is not attacking the ship. It is targeting the planetary surface, specifically Mr. Spector and the child." Marc felt Eli's second heartbeat synchronize with his own then stutter. Khonshu recoiled slightly. "It feeds on divine energy," the god realized. Q exhaled slowly. "Entropy incarnate. A parasitic correction. When gods tamper and regulators bind, sometimes the universe grows." Antibodies. The formless void descended, tendrils of distortion reaching toward Marc and Eli. Colonists fled in terror. Starfleet security opened fire, but phaser beams dissolved into nothing before touching it. Marc stepped forward instinctively. "You stay behind me," he told Eli. The boy's voice trembled. "It wants both of us." "I know." Bandages surged over Marc's body, armor reforming, but something was different. The power flowing through him wasn't just Khonshu's lunar wrath anymore. It pulsed with Eli's raw cosmic potential. Silver light flickered with faint blue undertones. Khonshu spoke urgently. Strike now, before it consumes the link. Marc braced himself. The void lunged. He leapt to meet it. His crescent blades carved through the darkness, but, instead of cutting, they were absorbed. The void recoiled, then adapted its tendrils, reshaping to bypass physical resistance. It wasn't a creature in the traditional sense. It was correction through erasure. Marc felt one tendril brush his shoulder, and memories vanished. For a split second, he forgot his own name. Stefan screamed inside his mind. "Marc, stay with us," Jake growled, forcing awareness back. Khonshu roared in fury, unleashing a wave of lunar energy that pushed the void back several meters. But the entity only expanded. On the Enterprise, data analyzed frantically. "Captain, the entity feeds on structured power, Bevan warp field harmonics. However, it appears destabilized by chaotic neural patterns." Picard's eyes narrowed, clarified. Mr. Spector's dissociative cognitive state may be generating unpredictable mental frequencies. Worf frowned. His fractured mind is a weapon. Data nodded, possibly the only one effective. On the surface, Marc staggered as another tendril grazed him, stripping away a memory of childhood for an instant before snapping back. Eli cried out as a smaller tendril reached for him. Without thinking, Marc did something reckless. He opened his mind fully, not just to Khonshu, to Stephen, to Jake, to Eli, all of it. Chaos, contradiction, pain, hope. The void lunged into that storm and hesitated. Its form rippled erratically, unable to stabilize against the torrent of conflicting identities and layered divine energy. Khonshu realized what Marc was doing. He risked annihilation, the god warned. Marc gritted his teeth. "It wants order to consume. I'll give it disorder." He stepped deeper into the void's reach. Memories flickered: New York rooftops, Egyptian tombs, blood under moonlight, laughter from lives he barely remembered. The void tried to erase them, but every erased fragment was replaced by another persona's memory. It couldn't isolate him. He couldn't define him. Eli reached out instinctively, channeling his own power into Marc, not as a weapon, but as amplification. Blue light intertwined with silver. The void shrieked not audibly, but through distortion. On the Enterprise, shields fluctuated wildly. "Crept in," Data said urgently. "The entity's destabilizing," Picard whispered. "Hold together, Mr. Spector." On the planet's surface, Marc roared not in anger, but in defiance. "You don't get to erase us." Khonshu unleashed a focused beam of lunar force through Marc's body, while Eli anchored the chaotic surge. The combined energy tore through the void's core. For a moment, everything went white. When the light faded, the rupture was gone. The sky was whole. The entity had dissipated into nothingness. Marc collapsed to his knees, armor fading. Eli fell beside him, breathing hard but alive. Khonshu's presence dim, not weakened, but altered. "You have proven adaptable," the god admitted quietly. Q reappeared, dusting imaginary lint from his sleeve, while he said lightly, "That was nearly apocalyptic." "Delightful." Marc glared up at him. Leaf Q's expression softened just slightly. "You've changed the game, Moon Knight. Gods rarely share power. Regulators rarely compromise. And you've become something neither side predicted." He glanced toward the stars. "And that makes this universe very interesting." In orbit, the Enterprise prepared to beam Marc and Eli aboard. As transporters engaged, Marc felt it clearly now. The bond wasn't temporary. Eli's growth was tethered to him. Khonshu was no longer sole master. And somewhere beyond normal space, other entities had felt the ripple of entropy's defeat. Not all of them would be as patient as the architects. As the Enterprise entered warp, leaving Vega IX behind, Marc stood in the observation lounge staring at the streaking stars. Eli stood beside him quietly. "Is it over?" the boy asked. Marc hesitated. In the reflection of the glass, for a split second, he didn't see one figure. He saw four: himself, Stephen, Jake, and behind them, Khonshu's skeletal silhouette. "No," Marc said softly. "It's just beginning." Because deep in subspace, beyond Federation charts, something ancient had taken notice of a god who learned to share, and it was coming. What if the greatest threat wasn't chaos, or correction, or even God-split consequence? And what if, by surviving, Moon Knight had just forced the universe's oldest powers to choose a side? Warp space shimmered outside the observation lounge as the Enterprise sped towards Starbase 12. Marc stood motionless, hands resting against the glass, watching starlight stretch into endless white lines. Eli sat quietly nearby, unusually calm for a child who had nearly unraveled a quadrant. Inside Mark's mind, there was no silence anymore. Stephen analyzed everything anxiously. Jake remained coiled and watchful. Khonshu lingered not, towering, not commanding, but present like a storm cloud held at bay. "You have altered the natural order," Khonshu said quietly. Mark didn't turn. "Good, the architects will monitor. The regulators will calculate. The predators will adapt." Mark exhaled slowly. "Let them." On the bridge, tension hadn't eased. "Captain," data reported. "Long-range sensors detect unusual subspace harmonics trailing us." Picard's expression hardened. "Define unusual." "Organized, purposeful, and accelerating." Worf stepped closer to the view screen. "Pursuit," but no ship appeared on sensors. No warp signature, no cloaked vessel. Just a distortion riding the Enterprise's wake, like a shadow stitched to their hull. In the observation lounge, Eli flinched. "It's closer," he whispered. Mark felt it too, pressure not hostile, not predatory like the void but immense. Khonshu stirred uneasily. His presence. "I have felt it only once before." Mark's voice lowered. "Where?" "In the space between pantheons." The lights flickered. Warp space outside rippled unnaturally, then fractured like shattered glass. The Enterprise was ripped out of warp without warning. "Red alert!" Klaxons blared. "Report!" Picard barked. "We have entered an artificially constructed spatial pocket," Data said, fingers flying across controls. "It does not correspond to any known region of space." Outside the view screen, stars were gone. Instead, a vast cosmic amphitheater stretched infinitely rings of luminous structures orbiting a central void. And within that void, something formed. Not mechanical like the architects, not skeletal like Khonshu. It was radiant, humanoid in silhouette, but composed of swirling galaxies and collapsing suns. Ku appeared instantly on the bridge. No theatrics this time. "Oh," he said softly. "They've convened." Picard turned sharply. "Who?" Q's eyes never left the forming entity. "The Conclave." The radiant being spoke not in sound, but in unified thought that every mind aboard the Enterprise felt simultaneously. Divine incursion detected. Balance contested. Avatar unclassified. Mark staggered in the observation lounge as the voice echoed through him. "They're talking about me," he muttered. Eli clutched his hand. Khonshu manifested fully behind them, wings wide but for the first time. He did not dominate the space. He was acknowledged, recognized. "Khonshu of the Ennead," the Conclave intoned. "You have extended your influence beyond your native continuum." Khonshu's voice was proud but restrained. "I defend justice where it is needed. You disrupt systemic equilibrium." Mark stepped forward, eyes burning faintly. "Then talk to me," he said aloud, though the Conclave heard the thought beneath it. On the bridge, Data's sensors overloaded, trying to quantify the being's energy output. "It surpasses measurable limits," he said quietly. The Conclave's attention shifted to Mark. "Avatar, you have restructured divine hierarchy through voluntary power sharing." Cliff swallowed. "I stopped a god from killing a child." Khonshu's presence bristled, but did not contradict him. "You bound potential catastrophe to unstable cognition," the Conclave observed. Stephen bristled internally. "Or unstable's a bit rude." Jake remained silent. Mark lifted his chin. "Unstable means unpredictable. Unpredictable means free." The Conclave pulsed brighter. "Freedom generates entropy. And so does tyranny." Mark shot back. A silence followed, not empty, but evaluative. Q leaned casually against a console, watching with fascination. "Oh, this is better than a trial," he whispered. The Conclave shifted its focus toward Eli. "Catalyst entity. The probability of universal distortion remains non-zero." Eli's voice trembled, but steady. "I don't want to hurt anyone." The Conclave responded coolly. "Intent is statistically irrelevant." Mars stepped between them instinctively. "You don't get to reduce him to math." Khonshu surprised him then. "I will not relinquish my avatar," the god declared, "nor the child." The Conclave's light intensified. "Defiance of multiversal consensus will result in isolation." Picard stepped forward on the bridge, addressing the entity with calm authority. "The Federation recognizes no authority that executes sentient beings without due process." Q smirked slightly. "Bold, Jean-Luc. Very bold." The Conclave acknowledged Picard. "Your civilization is young." Picard held firm. "Perhaps. But we have learned that fear of potential is not justification for eradication." Mark felt something shift. not in the conclave in Khonshu. The moon god's presence was no longer solely wrathful, it was contemplative. "You have changed me," Khonshu admitted to Marc privately. Marc almost laughed. "Don't get sentimental." The conclave's voice resonated again. "A compromise is possible." The words stunned everyone. "Define," Picard said cautiously. "Avatar, Spector and Catalyst entity will remain bound. Growth monitored by divine and regulatory observers. Should imbalance exceed tolerances, intervention escalates." Marc frowned. "You mean you'll come back?" "Yes." Khonshu's wings folded slowly. "I accept." Marc blinked. "You do?" "You are my fist," Khonshu replied. "But you are no longer merely a weapon. You are evolution." The conclave dimmed slightly, as though satisfied. A grim recorded. The cosmic amphitheater began dissolving. Stars reappeared. Warp space stabilized. Before vanishing completely, the conclave delivered one final statement. "Avatar, Spector, you are anomaly and bridge. Should further incursion occur, you will be summoned." The pocket dimension collapsed. The Enterprise returned to normal space. Alarms ceased. Silence filled the bridge. Q looked almost impressed. "Well done," he said lightly. "You've negotiated with beings older than my favorite paradoxes." Marc reappeared on the bridge moments later with Eli beside him. Picard studied him carefully. "You have placed yourself at the center of forces far beyond Starfleet's mandate." Marc nodded. "Yeah, that seems to be a pattern." Eli looked up at the captain. "Are we safe?" Picard offered the boy a reassuring nod. "For now." But as warp engines re-engaged and the Enterprise set course once more, Marc felt something undeniable. He was no longer just Moon Knight of Earth. It was known, catalogued, watched by regulators, predators, gods, and cosmic councils, and in the deepest layer of his mind, beneath Steven's worry and Jake's vigilance, he sensed a faint echo, not hostile, not divine, curious. Another presence had observed the conclave's decision, one that had remained silent, one that did not believe in compromise. Marc stared at the stars, because somewhere out there, a war between pantheons was beginning, and this time, it wouldn't be about one child. It would be about the right of gods to exist in a universe ruled by reason. What if the final battle wasn't about power, but about permission? And what if the universe itself had to decide whether gods deserved a place among the stars? Weeks passed. On the surface, life aboard the Enterprise resumed its rhythm diplomatic missions. Stellar cartography, the quiet optimism of exploration, but beneath that calm, something had shifted. Marc felt it every night. The stars didn't just shine anymore. They watched. Eli trained daily under Data's supervision and Counselor Troy's guidance. The boy's abilities no longer flared uncontrollably. Instead, they hummed contained within the shared tether that bound him to Marc and, through him, to Khonshu. But the tether had changed the god. Khonshu was quieter now, calculating, observing the Federation's laws, its ethics, its restraint. "You admire them," Marc said once, standing alone in the holodeck beneath a simulated desert moon. "I evaluate them," Khonshu corrected same thing. Yet even as growth took root, the echo Marc had sensed beyond the conclave grew stronger. It did not announce itself. It did not tear open space. It accumulated. Across the quadrant, reports began filtering in ancient relics, activating on forgotten worlds. Long dormant temples resonating with subspace frequencies. Mythological entities once dismissed as local legends, manifesting briefly, then vanishing. The pattern was clear. Other pantheons had felt the shift. On the bridge, Data compiled the data with unsettling precision. Multiple energy signatures, analogous to Khonshu's, are appearing across Federation space. Picard's voice was steady but grim. "Are they hostile?" "Not yet." Marc stood beside him. "They're choosing sides," he said quietly. "Explain," Picard requested. Marc's jaw tightened. The conclave allowed Khonshu to stay. That decision wasn't unanimous. As if summoned by the admission, space ahead of the Enterprise fractured net violently. Not chaotically, but deliberately. A fleet emerged, not of ships, of beings. Gigantic luminous forms, shaped by countless mythologies, serpentine deities of forgotten worlds. Armored titans, radiating stellar heat. Shadow-cloaked entities, whose eyes burned like quasars. At their center floated a figure of pure white, flames-leak, angular, cold. It spoke instantly into every mind aboard the ship. Divine proliferation within regulated space is unsustainable. Khonshu manifested beside Marc in full regalia. You oppose the conclave. We enforce what they hesitate to. The bridge crew watched in awe as gods assembled in open space like rival armadas. Q appeared quietly at the rear of the bridge, unusually solemn. "Oh," he murmured, "now, this is history." Picard turned to Marc. "Can this be resolved without violence?" Marc looked at the fleet of deities, beings who once ruled civilizations, who demanded worship, who thrived on fear and reverence. "They don't want coexistence," he said softly. "They want dominance or extinction." The white flame entity extended a blade of condensed starlight. "Khonshu, withdraw from this continuum or be unmade." Eli clutched Marc's arm. Khonshu's voice was calm. "I have chosen adaptation." "Then you are weakened." Marc stepped forward. "No," he said firmly. "He's evolved." The entity's attention shifted to Marc. "Avatar, anomaly. You disrupted hierarchy." "Good," Marc replied. The fleet advanced. Space trembled as ancient energies ignited. On the Enterprise, shields flared under the mere pressure of their presence. Worf gripped his station. "We cannot withstand this." Picard stood tall. "We will not fire unless fired upon." Marc closed his eyes. Inside his mind, Stephen trembled. Jake sharpened. Eli's energy pulsed and Khonshu waited. "You cannot defeat them all," the god said quietly. Marc exhaled. "I don't have to." He stepped forward and did something no god in that assembly expected. He released control, not to Khonshu, to balance. The tether between him and Eli expanded not explosively, but harmonically. Lunar silver and cosmic blue intertwined, radiating outward not as a weapon, but as resonance. The energy carried memory, human memory, hope, fear, mercy, choice. It spread across space like a signal. The attacking pantheon faltered, not harmed, but confronted. They felt what Khonshu now felt. Limitation, partnership, mortality, woven with divinity. The white flame leader recoiled slightly. "You dilute divine supremacy." Marc's voice carried through the void. "No, I humanize it." The conclave reappeared not as a threat, but as witness. Escalation detected. They intoned. The rebel pantheon hesitated. For the first time, they were not facing regulators or rival gods. They were facing consequence. Q watched, fascinated, as the tide shifted not through destruction, but through perspective. Khonshu stepped forward, wings half-folded, not dominating, not kneeling. "Power without restraint invites extinction," he declared. "I have learned this." The white flame entity's blade dimmed. "You accept limitation? I accept coexistence." Silence stretched across the stars. The rebel gods began to withdraw one by one, uncertain, divided. The white flame leader lingered last. "This experiment will fail," it warned. Marc met its blazing gaze. "Maybe, but it'll fail by choice, not fear." After a long pause, the entity dissolved into light. The fleet vanished. Stars returned to quiet brilliance. On the Enterprise bridge, stunned silence lingered before systems normalized. Picard slowly sat down. "It appears," he said carefully, "that we have just witnessed a theological evolution." Q chuckled softly. "Oh, Jean-Luc, you've witnessed something far rarer." Marc staggered slightly as the energy receded. Eli supported him. Khonshu's presence was steady, no longer towering, no longer wrathful, balanced. "You have redefined my existence," the god admitted. Marc smirked faintly. "Don't make me regret it." Eli looked up at the stars. "Are they gone?" "For now," Marc answered. Weeks later, as the Enterprise cruised peacefully through explored space, Marc stood alone in the observation lounge once more. He wasn't just the Fist of Khonshu anymore. He was bridge and boundary, proof that gods could adapt, proof that mortals could challenge them. Khonshu stood beside him, not looming, not commanding, equal in reflection. "You could return to your world," the god offered quietly. Marc watched the stars. "Nah," he said after a moment. "I think the galaxy's got enough criminals to keep us busy." In the reflection of the glass, 4 silhouettes stood together. Marc, Stephen, Jake, Khonshu, and faintly, just faintly, Eli's light shimmered behind them, growing, learning. Out in the vastness of deep space, whispers spread among ancient entities and emerging civilizations alike. The Fist of Khonshu had entered the final frontier, and instead of conquering it, he had changed it, not through vengeance, but through choice. And in a universe that believed it had outgrown gods, one god had learned to evolve. The stars did not blink this time. They burned steadily, watching, waiting for whatever came next.